Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Thank you everyone for joining us. I'd like to welcome you to the ISB Campus Masterclass on the critical issues in the history of the Quran with our speaker, Dr. Shehzad Saleem. Who we are as ISB Campus, we are a space for young British Muslims to explore faith together, to nurture a generation of positive purpose, balance, and moral integrity, to cultivate a strong, confident British Muslim identity, and actively participate and contribute to mainstream society by standing firmly for the values of justice and social concern. Shall stop screen sharing now? And now, inshallah, I would like to welcome our speaker. Dr. Shehzad Saleem is a fellow at Al Murid, a foundation for Islamic research and education in Lahore in Pakistan. He's recently completed an 18-year research project on the history of the Quran, looking at the issues of multiple versions. So inshallah, I'd like to hand over to him to start his presentation.
Okay, Bismillahir Rahmanir Rahim. Thank you very much for inviting me to this forum to express my opinions regarding the history of the Quran. I'll start off by actually describing very briefly to you my own journey into this subject. So as a professor, as a teacher, I was actually called upon to teach graduate students about 20 years ago in the fall of 1999 and early 2000 regarding history of the Quran. And when I started teaching this subject to graduate students, I thought it would be a very easy sailing because as far as the history of the Quran is concerned, it's probably the most easiest of subjects because we know that the Quran that we have today, after passing through various stages, through various phases, it's exactly the same Quran as was revealed to Prophet Muhammad ﷺ 14 and a half centuries ago. And that's the end of that. So I thought that not much time would be taken up by this subject, and I'll immediately move on to the textual study. So actually the course related to the textual study of the Quran with an introduction to the history of the Quran. But to my surprise, when I started to prepare for this subject, I came through, I went through a turmoil, and I was actually taken aback in various areas when I thought that there are so many things which people today attribute regarding the history of the Quran to the Quran itself, which simply was mind-boggling for me, because to me the fundamental verse of the Quran, which says "Inna nahnu nazzalna zikra wa inna lahu lahafizun," obviously meant that the Quran has been revealed by the Almighty and it is His responsibility to protect it. But far from this protection, I came across a whole bunch of things that really, they were, to say the least, they attacked the faith that I had in the Quran. And I had to go through a series of I would say, a series of conjectures and speculations and research activities that ultimately made me realize the fact that I have to devote my life, or a better part of my life, in researching out some of the basic questions that seem to plague the history of the Quran. And these are the questions which, before anyone else can ask, are my own. They are the voice of my own mind. So I'm going to start off with presenting some of the basic questions which came across my mind and which actually really troubled me and really bothered me. And they pushed me to go into my research. So my talk today would be split into two. In my first part, I tried to walk you through these questions very briefly, and then try to answer these questions the way I understood them. Obviously, this is something which needs a lot of time, so I would need to oversimplify at times, and at times I will just walk through certain issues rather in a rather brisk way. But of course, I'm always there to ask questions from in the Q&A session, which is going to follow, as well as later on, whenever all of you or any of you has a question, I would be gladly there to answer it. So just to start off, I'm going to share my screen with you to enumerate some of the problems that I found were problems that would, seriously dent my understanding of the Quran. And okay, let me see. page has disappeared. I'm sorry. Okay, so here you go. So basically, as I said, that my understanding of the Quran actually led me to some of the questions which I am now going to present to you. And these questions obviously are, I mean, there are quite a few of these questions that I'd like to actually communicate them to you. But I'll contain myself to 7 major questions that shook me and that actually propelled me to find out what exactly the truth is about them. The first and the foremost question.
I'm very sorry. At the moment, we can't see your screen.
Okay. So I don't know what has happened here. Just let me do it again. Screen sharing, what's going on? Well, it seems that it's not appearing here. What I get a message is that the screen has something.
Okay. If you, how much is on there? Because you could maybe send it to ISB office, and we'll try and sort something out, inshallah.
Okay. Okay. So I think we just tested that, and I could see the screen. I don't know what's gone wrong here. Okay. So can you see the screen now?
No, I'm afraid not.
Oh. Okay, I think now we got it. Can you see it
Yes.
now?
Yes,
Oh,
it's all good. Thank you.
I'm sorry about that. I don't know what happened. Anyway, so I was talking about that there were certain issues which actually which faced me in the eye, and they really made me struggle when I was teaching this subject. And the first and the foremost of these issues was the fact that I was startled when I got to know that we have 5 different versions of the Quran which are being followed today in the Muslim Ummah. And when I say that there are 5 versions, it's not that I'm talking about any pronunciation or any lahja, as they would say, the way that we pronounce certain words. It does not relate to any accent or something like that. I mean versions which have words which are different, inflections which are different, verb patterns which are different, difference in singular and plural. And there are not 1 or 2 of them. There are 5 different versions. And one of the versions is the one that we know of and we generally go through and read, but there are several other, as I said, 4 other versions. The one that we have in the Muslim Ummah in the vast majority is the one that you're just seeing on your screen. So it is called the Riwayah of Hafs from the Qira'at of Asim. So just ignore these names even if you don't know them. So these are the names after which these versions have been named. So the Riwayah of Hafs basically means that there is the Qira'ah, which means a recital of a scholar of Qira'ah, who was called Asim ibn Abi Najud, who was a Kufan who lived in Iraq, and his student was Hafs ibn Sulaiman, and he actually read the Quran in a certain way, and that is the Quran that we Muslims read in our majority areas. So I counted about, so this was about 10 years ago when I made the statistics. I calculated that 97% of the Muslims, they read this Quran, So people like us, people like you in the UK, in the US, greater part of Central Asia, in Australia, and most of the other areas, you have the same version. But in 11 countries, most of them which are found in North Africa, and one of them is in Saudi Arabia, or I can say the southern part of Saudi Arabia, which is Yemen actually, they have 4 different versions. And I just said that versions means versions. I mean, there are differences. I'll just give you an example of. So this is the first of them. And as I said, this is the majority version. Then we have another version, which is called the Rawaya of Warsh from the Qira'ah of Nafir. So this is a person who was the scholar of Medina, and his Qira'ah is supposed to be read in even today. I mean, in fact, it is being read today in Morocco, in Algeria, and in some other parts of North Africa. I had the privilege to go there, travel, I spent time in Morocco, and I read there from the shuyukh of Africa, and especially from the shuyukh of Morocco, a city called Fez, which is, of course, a very famous city, a very ancient city. And they had this qira'ah of Nafi, and from qira'at of Nafi, we have the Riwayah of Warsh. So Riwayah is just a version of the qira'at of Nafi, just to make things a little simpler. So then we have another version, which is called the Riwayah of Qalun from the Qira'at of Nafi. So Nafi is a person, as I said, who is a very famous reciter of the Quran, and he lived in Medina, and his 2 students, one of them was Warsh, that I just spoke of. So his Qira'at is followed in parts of Morocco, and we have another of his students who's called Qalun, and his Riwayah is followed in Libya and Tunisia. And then we have another person who's called Duri, and he is a student of another famous reciter, a Qari of the Quran, who's called Abu Amr. And he was a Basran. And his Basra, of course, is also part of Iraq. In those days, it was part of Iraq. And it's a twin city of Kufa. And parts of it are read in Sudan. And finally, we have a 5th version, which is the Riwayah of Hisham from the Qira'at of Abdullah ibn Amir. And this Qira'at is read in parts of Yemen. And of course, this is slightly more alarming because Yemen was the only country which was actually brought into the rule of Prophet Muhammad in his own lifetime, sallallahu alaihi wasallam. And Muaz ibn Jabal, as you would be remembering from Muslim history, he was sent there to govern Yemen. So we have another version of the Quran in parts of Yemen. It's not the entire Yemen that we have this different Quran. This different Quran has its roots in a specific region in Yemen, and that is called Hadramaut. Of course, it's the name of a place. Okay, now comes the question that what are these differences? So I'm going to give you a few examples of these differences in which words have changed. So one of the examples that I can give you is that there is a change or deletion of words. So one of the versions of the Quran has فَإِنَّ اللَّهَ هُوَ الْغَنِيُّ الْحَمِيدُ. So this is the version that we are used to. But in another version, which is the version of Nafi, the Rawaya of Warsh from Nafi, we don't have the Hoa there. So we just have the words فَإِنَّ اللَّهَ الْغَنِيُّ الْحَمِيدُ, which of course changes the stress of the sentence. And then we have similarly another difference, which is, I can classify it as a difference in singular and plural. So the Quran that you are used to, that you would be having in the UK or anywhere else that you're studying, you can find that the words are وَصَدَّقَتْ بِكَلِمَاتِ رَبِّهَا وَكُتُبِهِ وَكَانَتْ مِنَ الْقَانِتِينَ. These are the words in the Quran that you would be reading. But in the Riwayah of Warsh, for example, we have a singular, a plural in place of the word kutub. The word kutub occurs in the plural in our Quran, but in the Quran of Africans, it occurs in the singular. So the verse is وَصَدَّقَتْ بِكَلِمَاتِ رَبِّهَا وَكِتَابِهِ. Of course, this is the verse which refers to Maryam, to Mary, alayhi salam, and about her it is said that she was one who attested to the kalima of her Lord and to his book. So one of would be to his book, and the other one's translation would be to his books. And then we have another difference in this in these verbs, and that is that at times you find the verb patterns different. So we have yuqattalun and we have yaqtulun, as you can see clearly being marked. And the Quran that you will have one of these versions, and the Qurans that other people will have a different version. So I've just made two sets of these differences. Otherwise, these differences, there are more than that, and you'll have a difference at times in all these 5 versions. So then there is another class of differences, which is called differences in declensions, and that means that the Arab are different. So Hammalat al-Hatab is the Quran that we are used to. It's in the Quran that we read, but in other places it is Hammalatul Hatab. So there is the word occurs in the nominative, and there is you can clearly see it is declined in the nominative. So this is the first question that I was faced with. And then the second question that I saw was that almost all the verses of the Quran have these variant readings. And as far as the first question was concerned, I could find all these Qurans being read in respective territories, which I've just outlined. But as far as the second question is concerned, these are the variant readings. They may or may not be read in various parts of the world, but they exist in all our tafsir works, And this is just one page of Quran. You can see the Quran in the middle is the one that we follow in majority. As I said, the 97% of the Muslims follow this Quran. And on the margins, you can, when you have the time, you can enlarge it. You'll see the differences, how a particular verse was different in other Qurans or in other tafsir books, so that it gives you this idea that not only is the Quran read in 5 versions in different places, but in our tafsir works, we have the sanction that whether or not it is being read in particular areas or countries, when you are reading the Quran in tafsir books, you are given this leverage that you can read a verse differently as well. Of course, this difference is governed by certain laws and certain, I would say, stipulations. One of them is that it has to have a isnad, which means it has to be reliably traced back to the Prophet himself. It has to be in accordance with one of the Musaf of Usman, which he, of course, collated in his times, and its Arabic should be correct. So these are the 3 criteria for variant readings. And if any reading fulfills these 3 criteria, it is said that the Quran can be read on that reading, and it would be okay to read our prayer, our salah on that Quran, even if it's just different the way we read it. So that was the second question that I was faced with. And of course, this opened up a whole new window, which meant that if this is one page of the Quran, and you can clearly see that this page, the book that I took it from, actually has about 550 pages. So if there is an average of about 10 differences per page, and if there are 500 pages of that Quran, you can see that there are about 5,000 differences in reading these various verses taken collectively. And when I say differences, again, they refer to the fact that they change the meaning of the word either through declensions or through singular and plural, or through verb patterns, or through various other instruments of the Arabic language. And the third thing that came to my notice was that the Quran that we have today, it seems that a lot of our hadiths tell us that the Quran we have today is incomplete, because it doesn't contain certain verses which it was supposed to contain. So we have a hadith in the Sunan of Ibn Majah, which tells us that there was a verse in the Quran which is famously called the stoning verse, in which those guilty of adultery, they were condemned to stoning, death by stoning. And that is a verse which is supposed to have existed in the Quran, and later on it was taken out, and the Caliph Umar was absolutely annoyed with that. He said that why is it that people have, as the hadith speaks, have taken it out? And the Caliph Umar is reported to have said that if I had the ability or the opportunity, I would have placed it back. And this is the famous hadith of the Prophet, which I am not going to read. I mean, you can read it later on, but it tells us that Umar ibn Khattab said that people will fear that time has passed, and someone will say that the book of stoning is not found in the Quran. And then he said, well, I actually would like to tell you that there was a verse which is no longer there, and that verse has been written down right in front of you. It says, "Ash-shaykhu wa-shaykhatu iza zanaya farjumuhuma al-battata," which means necessarily stone to death the married man and the married woman guilty of adultery. So this is a verse which is not found in the Quran that we have today, But Umar radiallahu anhu said that this was there, and the Prophet stoned to death criminals on the basis of this verse. And the Caliph Umar himself said that after he passed away, we as his successors, we stoned to death those guilty of adultery on the basis of this verse. However, it is no longer there. And then they gave it a technical word to that verse. The technical word that they gave was mansukh talawa dunul hukum, which means its recital has been revoked, but its directive still remains. Okay, now I can come to another question that stared me in the eye, and that was that there are scribal errors in the Quran, which means that the text of the Quran has words or letters which are redundant, which play no role in the text of the Quran. And in fact, if they are read, they give an opposite meaning. So let me give you just one example. Surah Al Imran, verse 158, it says, "Wala im muttum aw qutiltum la ilallahi tuhsharun." So you see here, the word alif after the letter L of the letter La is actually superfluous. It's an extra word, and it actually changes the word or the meaning of the whole verse. And if I translate the whole verse, if I keep in view this letter, it would be whether you die or whether you are killed, you shall not be gathered before the Almighty. Whereas, of course, the meaning was you shall be gathered. But because of this extra alif, the positive sentence has turned into a negative one. And there are so many examples of this. I mean, I'm just going to give you a few. You can just skim through them when you get this these slides, and you can see that either there is a ya which is extra, either there is a waw which is superfluous, or there is an alif. And if you give due regard to them, there is a change in meaning completely, and you get to know, or you get to understand the fact that a particular verse is saying something. However, if we read it the way it has been written, it gives you the opposite meaning. Okay, the next question, which is the fifth question, which I was faced with, was that you know that any student of Islamic history or Quranic history knows that the Caliph Usman, in his times, he made copies of the Quran and he sent them to various parts of his empire. Now, lo and behold, the copies that he made were copied from the original Mus'haf of Abu Bakr radiallahu anhu, which was actually kept with Umar and later on with Hafsa radiallahu anha. And the strange thing that comes to mind is that the copies which were made by Usman radiallahu anha, they were not identical copies. There were differences in these copies. And the same verse was written differently in different copies. Just to give you this example, when Usman made those copies and he sent one of them to Medina, the verse of Surah Baqarah, verse 132, read, وَوَصَّى بِهَا Ibrahim. However, the same verse, when you read it in the Kufan or the Basran Codex, of course is the Quran, the copy of the Quran, we have, instead of wassa, we have ausa, which of course does not drastically change the meaning, although it changes the stress. And similarly, we have those differences which you can just see on your screen, وَوَصَّيْنَا الْإِنسَانَ بِوَالِدَيْهِ إِحْسَانًا. However, in other place we have husna. And this goes on and on. And then the sixth thing that came to my notice was that there are a number of narratives or a number of ahadith of the Prophet actually, which talk about the fact that the Quran was finalized after the death of the Prophet, and that too with the help of two witnesses. And then the Quran that was collected in the times of the Caliph Abu Bakr was never put to use because it was just kept with Umar and later on with his daughter Hafsa, because we see that when Usman tried to copy from it, he found that there were certain verses which were missing in the Quran, and he had to actually point out that these verses were missing. So in other words, we find when the Quran was collected after the Prophet's demise, when I say collected, it means written down in one place. It was sort of haphazardly written down because, as was later known, that some of the one of the verses at least was not written down, and later it had to be inserted, and not inserted because a bunch of people said that it was a verse of the Quran, but because just two witnesses testified. And then, of course, we have other disputes that we find arising in the time of the Caliph Usman, when he saw that people were reading the Quran in a different way, and the armies in Armenia and Azerbaijan who were fighting there, the Kufan and the Basran armies, they had a quarrel with each other because of the fact that the way that they read the Quran and the way the other people read the Quran in the same time, but of different tribes, they started to quarrel with each other because of the fact that the same verse was read differently by other people. And then we have the fact that there is a whole bunch of sayings which say that Usman made an entirely new collection of the Quran. He did not even look at the Quran of Hafsa. And because of the fact that he never took a look at that, he started afresh. His collection actually never ever took into account the Quran that was collected by Abu Bakr, so to speak. And finally, we have a big difference between the Shiite and the Sunni collection accounts. The Shiite accounts, excuse me, they tell us that the Caliph Ali anhu had brought the Quran over right after the demise of the Prophet and had told them that he had collected the Quran at the order of the Prophet Muhammad. But the Sunni account tells us that, on the other hand, the people who were gathered around in the house of the Prophet, including Abu Bakr, Umar, Usman, and all the rest, they rejected the Quran, which was brought by Ali. And Ali actually became very angry, and he said that, okay, I'm no longer going to show it to you, and it's going to appear near the end of times when Imam Mahdi arrives, and he will implement this Quran, but until that time, it will remain among my descendants. Of course, this is an entirely different story of collection. And then finally, viewers, I got this thing on the screen before you, which tells us a famous hadith, which tells us that the Quran has been revealed on 7 ahruf. And until today, this hadith has been an enigma because very few people, I mean, next to almost, I can clearly see and clearly tabulate that there's not a single person who has given a satisfactory explanation of this hadith. Although this hadith is used primarily to justify that there are variant readings of the Quran, because the Prophet allowed those variant readings, and there's a famous incident which is quoted in which Umar anhu actually heard a famous companion, Hisham bin Hakim bin Hizam, reading the Quran in the prayer, and he was reading Surah Furqan in a different way than the one in which Umar used to read it. And Umar became very angry, and as soon as the prayer finished, actually, he just took Hisham bin Hakim bin Hizam and he went to the Prophet and he said, well, he's reading Surah Furqan in another way, and I know Surah Furqan in a different way. The Prophet asked both of them to read the surah in front of him, and both of them read differently. And the Prophet said, both of you are correct, and which actually meant that he ratified that it could be read differently. And therefore, this is one of the reasons why we call that the Quran can be read differently, because we have this narrative of the Prophet Muhammad ﷺ, which tells us that there are more than one versions of the Quran. So you see, these are the questions which stared us in the eye, and any person who actually who has this inclination towards writing down the history of the Quran will be faced with these questions. Needless to say, our Western scholars have also put up all these questions, and even more than these questions. But let us be fair. These questions are absolutely, I would say, valid, because these are the questions that I found to be absolutely unsatisfactorily answered in our works. And I mean, how can we think of a Quran which has more than one version? We have 5 versions. We have variant readings. We have narratives telling us that the Quran is incomplete, and these narratives are found in famous books of the Hadith, including Bukhari, which is one of the topmost books of Hadith. We have scribal errors in the Quran, and we still have them today. Even today, you pick up the Quran, you still have those scribal errors, so therefore, if you read the Quran according to those errors, at instances it'll give you an opposite meaning. And then the Osmanic copies were not identical. We have disparaging reports of the Quran collection in various eras, and finally we have this fact that the Prophet himself ratified that the Quran could be read variously. And of course, this was something which was, to say that I was disturbed would be an understatement. But then what I did is that I tried to find these answers in the light of the studies which were conducted, especially by a famous scholar of the subcontinent. His name was Hamiduddin Farahi. He existed. He lived in India, and he died in 1930. And it was he actually who, for the first time, said, "Well, we have to find out the history of the Quran, or we have to learn the history of the Quran, not from history or from Hadith, but from the Quran itself first. And look what the Quran tells us about its own history. So he actually said that there is this verse which people have missed out on, which actually clearly tells us that the Quran was compiled in the times of the Prophet himself. It has one reading. There are no multiple readings. And as far as the narratives are concerned, which speak of multiple readings, they have to be checked and reevaluated. So he said that this is the verse, which is the 75th surah, 16 to 19 verse, which tells us that the Prophet has said that you must not move your tongue hastily to acquire this whole Quran, which is being revealed in various parts. The Almighty tells us that it is going to be us who is going to collect and recite it. So when we have recited it, you should follow this recital, which meant that the Quran would be revealed chronologically in a way, and then it will be compiled in a different sequence. And then the Prophet is told that he should abandon the previous sequence and he should follow the new sequence. So Farahi actually posited this theory that basically the chronological sequence of the Quran, the way the Quran has described us here, has been the real cause or the real bone of contention, because once the Quran was rearranged, some of the verses which were revealed in the chronological order, they were altered because of the fact that, of course, the Quran had to be recompiled and given to the rest of the Ummah in its new form. So what happened was that the original revelation of the Quran, which was the chronological revelation of the Quran, somehow still existed with the students of the Sahaba. The Sahaba very well knew that this chronological revelation is not the one which we are required to follow, but just for academic purposes as archival material, they transferred parts of that revelatory sequence, the chronological sequence, also to their students, not realizing that this is the Quran which was actually abrogated in favor of the fresh collection. The fresh collection actually abrogated the previous one. And in that fresh collection, some of the previous verses either were left out or they were totally altered. And this is how, once this final Quran was arranged, we find that the Prophet actually transferred it to the perpetual concurrence of his companions and to their consensus to the rest of the Ummah. So you can see that this is how the Quran got transmitted to us. So it's like a bunch of people, a whole generation memorizing the Quran and then transferring it to the next generation. And this process has gone on and on. And this is how we have got the Quran that we have today. Now, of course, the question arises that what is the reason that we have a different Quran in certain other areas? And the reason for that, as I said, is that the remnants of the chronological revelation of the Quran, parts of those remnants, they still existed. And they were transferred by the Sahaba to their students, not because they were parts of the Quran, but because there were some verses that they had heard from the Sahaba, from the Prophet himself, but they were revoked. But as a matter of interest and academic importance, they just transmitted that. But later on, this Tawatur transmission, which of course held sway, this got mixed up with those verses also, which were transferred in the form of isolated reports from one person to another as the remnants of the revelatory sequence of the Quran. And ultimately, this happened that a whole bunch of people called the Qaris, which I just referred to you, that Nafi, for example, was one of them, Abu Amr was one of them. So they were the ones who started collecting those remnants also, which were transferred by the Sahaba. And then they instituted a whole system in which they gave preference to certain verses and formed a whole system of the Quran in which a particular verse would be read differently and other verses would be read differently. So one scholar actually heard what he heard from his teachers, and because of the fact that he heard a couple of verses, 2 or 3 of them from his teacher, he gave preference to one of them and started to transmit it to his students as well. So in effect, we had the Quran being transmitted to the Ummah, the real Quran, which we are exposed to, and which of course is the Quran that all of us know. And side by side, there was this Quran which was basically revealed, or partly of the related sequence, the chronological sequence. It got caught up between these students of the Sahaba who thought that they also constitute the Quran. And then later people, they started to simulate these variant readings in one, and they started to acknowledge them as well. And then in certain areas, it happened that they were actually implemented by a court decree, by a royal decree. So in Morocco, for example, in the year 252 Hijra, we find a royal decree in which the reading of Nafi was actually implemented because he was the teacher of Imam Malik, and because the Maliki fiqh was in vogue in the North African countries, so they thought that they'll also adopt the Quran of Imam Malik. So this is how it started to get implemented in certain countries, and ultimately there were 11 of those countries in which that singular Quran, of course, I would say, that was not transmitted to Tawatur in any way, came to be known as individual transmissions, and those transmissions were held correct because they thought that the Prophet himself has sanctioned these various readings. And hence we have this phenomena in which the Quran was revealed in various forms. And this is how I think this whole situation can be explained. Now, as far as some of the narratives are concerned, which speak of multiple readings, or as I said, speak of the incompleteness of the Quran, or some of the other questions which I just narrated before you, of course, some of them you can ask in the Q&A section. But the bottom line is the narratives that describe the compilation of the Quran, I examined them and reapplied the principles of Hadith criticism on them, and I found them to be lacking in their authenticity. And the 7 Ahruf narrative, of course, is something which I dealt in detail in my book. And that actually is something which tells us that the 7 Ahruf narrative has not been soundly reported either through its isnad, and as far as its interpretation are concerned, none of the interpretations offered is sound, and the narrative does not merit any authenticity or acceptability. And similar is the case with some of the other narratives. As far as the stoning verse is concerned, it is an entirely different perspective to that. We know that as far as the Quran is concerned, there are certain other verses which speak of exemplary punishment for people who are rapists, for example, or who take the law and order in their hand. So that has been mentioned separately in Surah Ma'idah. As far as this verse is concerned, which I just flashed before you in one of the slides, it is found in a narrative of Ibn Majah. The narrative itself is not sound enough. It cannot be relied upon. But unfortunately, we find our scholars still relying upon that narrative. And of course, because of the fact that they think that any narrative which occurs in the Sihasitta or the 6 canonical books has to merit this attention. So all in all, what I did was that I reapplied these rules of historical criticism to view that the disparaging reports regarding the history of the Quran, they don't hold ground. And as a result, we have to be consistent in our principles, in our application, and we have to reject them because they don't stand to the test of historical criticism. And as far as the variant readings of the Quran are concerned, as well as the fact is concerned that some of the countries have a different Quran, that can be easily explained because there was a time in our history when people thought that whatever we have received from the Prophet holds sanction, just as the Quran that we have received through Tawatur holds sanction. And it is like a dual transmission of the Quran, a case of dual transmission. The Quran that one knows the way we know it, and then there's another Quran which only the scholars know, or which was implemented in certain countries because of a royal decree. However, as I said, it is not the original Quran because of the fact that it was basically either the remnants of the chronological revelation, or at times there were scribal errors in that, or at times it was the fact that the written Quran did not have diacritics or vowel sounds, and it was copied wrongly. And not to speak of the fact that there were narratives also which were concocted in favor of these verses. And ultimately, these were the causes of these variant readings. And if we understand the Quran in the light of that Quranic verse, which says that Inna alayna jam'ahu wa Qur'ana, that the Quran has just one reading, and that is the reading which has reached us through Tawatur and the Ijma of the Ummah and the Sahaba, we can be clearly certain that that is the right reading. As far as the other readings are concerned, they do not go reliably back to the Prophet in this way, which is, of course, the way of Tawatur. So I'll end my talk here. I tried to be simple, and I'm sure I've skipped a lot of details and I've oversimplified a lot of things because I had just about 40 minutes or so to explain this. I know you must be having a lot of questions, so I'd like to leave the rest of the time to you so that you can ask questions that come to your mind.
Thank you very much. That was definitely very insightful. Inshallah, we'll start looking at some of the questions. So please make sure you post them in the Q&A function. So the first question is about the compilation of the Qur'ans that we have. So who decided where different ayahs belonged in the Qur'an, and who decided the title of the surahs?
So as far as the compilation of the Quran is concerned, the way I have researched, I found that it is the Prophet himself was told by Gabriel when he was revealing the Quran to him that the verses will be placed in such a surah, in such a order. It's not the Prophet himself or the Sahaba himself who decided what way to place them. It was, of course, the Almighty who communicated the order and the placement to Gabriel, who then communicated to Prophet Muhammad. And as far as the titles are concerned, which are, of course, if you refer to the names of the surah, the names were generally given by the Sahaba and by Prophet himself at times. And as far as certain other surahs are concerned, for example, the isolated letters, which are called the Huruf Muqatta'at. So 29 surahs of the Quran begin with those letters, which are, of course, are like Qaf or Noon or Alif Lam Mim or Swad. All these are basically names of the surah given by the Almighty himself. So in these 29 surahs, the title of the surah was given by the Almighty himself. And for the rest, we find the Prophet and the companions naming the surah. And even where the Almighty gave this name, like these disjointed letters, even there we find the Sahaba giving it some other name. So it was very customary in the times of the Prophet or the times of classical Arabic to have more than one name of a composition. So for example, Alif Lam Mim is the name of Surah Baqarah also, and is also the name, Alif Lam Mim itself is the name of the surah as well. So we have two names of that surah. One is Alif Lam Mim, the other one is Baqarah. So one of them is kept by the Almighty, the other one is kept by the Sahaba. So we have this thing intertwined.
Thank you. That's a really interesting answer. So the next question is, how were the names assigned to the different versions of the Quran that were completed? And what is the chronology of these different versions after the life of Muhammad Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam? So when were they compiled, or when were they known to be compiled?
So, okay, so these versions, I can out of my research, I have found that the first of them came into existence 250 years after the Prophet. So to be exact, the first of them was in 252 Hijrah. So if you discount some of the time of the Prophet, you can clearly see it was about 220 or 230 years after the Prophet passed away. And then subsequently in the next 100 years, the rest of the versions sprung up. But if you're talking about individual versions, of course, which were yet to be implemented, then this was something which took place in the 2nd century. So for example, the first of these versions would be the version of Ibn Kasir, not the scholar Ibn Kasir, who is also the exegete of the Quran. This is Abdullah ibn Kasir, who was the Qari of Medina, of Mecca, I'm sorry. So this took place about, I would say, 150 years after the Prophet passed away.
Okay, thank you. And then someone has asked about why different countries haven't adapted the Quran of Ijma. I think that's their question.
Right, absolutely. So that is the big question. And that is the question that also bothered me, that why is it that the Quran, which has been transferred through Ijma and Tawatur, why is it that has not been adopted? Well, apparently the answer to this question is that the traditional scholars, they believe that the Quran, which has been transmitted through Ahad reports, which means not through Ijma, that also is the Quran. So you see, our traditional scholars say that there are two categories of the Quran. One of them is transferred through Ijma, and the other one is not through Ijma. And that was precisely what I was referring to when I said that there is a case of dual transmission. So one is that singular transmission in which a few people transmitted the Quran, and it was not with Ijma. But this landmark acceptance took place in the times of Imam Shafi'i, one of the famous scholars of our Ummah, in the early 2nd century of Hijrah, when he said that whatever we find being transmitted from the Prophet, we have to accept it. And therefore, if it is transmitted by reliable means, we'll accept it, and we will not make it a condition that that acceptance is something which depends on Ijma or Tawatur, because, I mean, this is another form, this is another way in which things have been transmitted. So just as our hadiths have been transmitted in an isolated way, these variant readings also have been transmitted similarly, because after all, they have been transmitted in those hadiths. I mean, one of the contents of those hadiths are these variant readings. So just as hadith has transferred the history of the Prophet, the way he lived, the way he fought, etc., they have also transferred that sequence of the Quran that was originally revealed. So that is how our ummah came to accept that Quran as well.
Okay, thank you. So someone else has asked, what about Kitab al-Masahif of Ibn Abi Dawud? It also supports the idea that there are different versions of the Quran.
Yeah.
How have you dealt with that in your book?
Yeah, I have. So Kitab al-Masahif is a book by Abdullah ibn Abi Dawud. He was the son of the famous scholar of Hadith, Abu Dawud. And most of the narratives which are found in his book, they don't qualify to be called narratives, because I have examined almost all of them. And in fact, before me, a lot of work has been done by a few Arab scholars, and they have shown that very few of the reports which are found in the Kitab al-Masahif are authentic.
Okay, thank you. And so we have two final questions left. So someone else has said that Allah says that He is the protector of the Quran. How do you combine that definition with these different versions of the Quran?
So I think the Almighty has protected the version that was the real version. And so it's not that He never said that He'll let other spurious versions not prosper or not live. So that is a part of our own trial and test. So the Almighty has allowed people to intellectually understand things and advance in their understanding, and they are left free to choose in how to understand a particular phenomena. So this is something which is a choice that people have made. But as far as the Almighty Himself is concerned, He has preserved and kept intact the Quran, which, of course, as you just referred to, is the Quran that has been transferred through ijma, which means the consensus of companions. That has existed. The only thing is that other Qurans too have existed, but they don't nullify the fact that the Quran, the Almighty actually protected that original Quran. They only give us this flavor that the Almighty has allowed people to understand things the way they think are correct. And this is basically a test for us to judge the correct from the incorrect, the spurious from the authentic.
Okay, thank you. Sorry, someone has asked for clarification. So they said the particular versions of the Quran, so the Qur'an of Hafs, how did those get their names precisely?
Right. So the reason that they got their names was because of these famous qaris, or these reciters. They were very adept readers of the Quran, and they had their own ikhtiyar, as the word goes. Ikhtiyar means they had their preferences. So when they saw that the Sahaba had read the Quran differently, they chose between various Sahaba, same verse being read by a companion, different companions in different ways. So they had this authority given to them. In fact, it was a self-invested authority. But Abu Bakr ibn Mujahid was a personality who was a vizier or a governor of the eastern part of Spain in his time in the 4th century Hijra, who became a very, very important personality. He actually selected these 7 famous readers, and he simply enforced their readings because of the fact that he had great power and authority, and people accepted his authority. So all these 7 readings that we know of, which are very famous, are the ones which he actually chose. Otherwise, we have many other readers, I mean, the excess of 30 or 40 of them. But these are the 7 ones who became famous. And the reason that he actually chose them was that he selected 1 reader each from a famous city of the Muslim empire. So he selected 1 from Medina, 1 from Basra, 1 from Kufa. In fact, he selected 3 from Kufa because he thought that there is not a single person who could be represented in Kufa. So he selected 3 from Kufa, 1 from Medina, 1 from Mecca, 1 from Syria, and 1 from Basra. So from 4 cities, he selected 1 each. And from the city of Kufa, he selected 3 because he thought that these are the 3 who represent the city of Kufa. So it was primarily his selection of these famous readers that was ultimately adopted and became very famous.
Thank you. So someone has asked that with these different versions of the Quran that have existed, does this Quran still hold its status of inimitability?
It does, because you see, the inimitability factor is with the Quran that we have with us today, and you can test it. You'll find that its inimitability it's still intact. The fact that you can see the verses, the way they have been revealed, the way they have been composed, the way they have been set about in the Quran, they can clearly be, they are clearly the ones which can simply not be imitated in any way. And also remember the fact that as far as the other Qurans are concerned, remember the claim of our scholars is that they also were revealed to the Prophet, and the Sahaba actually took them from the Prophet. So to them, I would say, I mean, if you talk about our general scholars, they think that even those versions carry that inimitability, because to them, they were also divinely revealed. Of course, I don't agree with them, but I'm just presenting their view.
Thank you. So for any other questions, please make sure that you put them into the Q&A chat. And the last one that I have on here is, has there been any work done to verify the different versions of other Qur'ans that exist?
No, unfortunately not, because you see, the thing is that they have been accepted by our traditional scholars per se. I mean, accepted because of the fact that they think that the Prophet himself sanctioned them. Remember, I just spoke of that hadith which says the Quran has been revealed on 7 ahruf. So that is one of the reasons that our scholars think that these different Qurans are actually sanctioned by the Almighty and by the Prophet himself. And so therefore, our Vatican, which is the Saudi Arabia, they have published all these Qurans. So these 5 versions have been published by the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia, and the King Fahd complex, which is one of the biggest publishers of the Quran, the text of the Quran, they have published these versions, which means that they have actually ratified them. They accept them. And because of the fact that they have accepted them, they don't think that they are spurious, and hence there is absolutely no chance or no case to verify whether they are correct or not, because they have already accepted them.
Thank you. So someone else has asked, does the Quran mention that it was transmitted through ijma and tawatur?
No, it does not. It does not. You see, this is a historical analysis of the Quran. All that the Quran mentions is that the Almighty will safeguard it. And the way that the Almighty has safeguarded it is He has taken upon human means. He has depended on human means to have it protected. And that is through the ijma and tawatur. These are 2 instruments. And these are the 2 instruments in which established facts are transmitted. And there is absolute certitude in the transmission. It's completely transmitted in a faithful way. Nothing is altered. It's like saying that it's a whole generation which transfers to the next generation, and so on and so forth, in which any chance of any conspiracy or collusion to falsehood is absolutely taken care of. So this is the mechanism which the Almighty seems to have adopted. But we don't have the terms of ijma or tawatur, because these are basically historical terms. They don't relate to the corpus or the content of the Quran.
Thank you. So someone has asked that are these differences known in the chains of memorization of the Quran? So do these variations exist within these chains of memorization?
I'm sorry, I couldn't get the question. Could you repeat it?
So the variations in the types of Quran that exist, do those variations also have the oral tradition that we associate with our Quran?
Yes, especially in the countries which have adopted them. So there is an oral tradition amongst them. However, as far as other countries are concerned, barring those 11 countries in which I showed you that chart of variant readings, they don't have any oral tradition. They just exist in tafsir works or in some hadith works. But those 11 countries which have those 4 versions, they have an oral tradition. And that oral tradition, of course, is memorized by the Hafaz of those countries. And they read them in their Taraweeh, and they memorize them in their madrasas and in the seminaries. So yes, there is that oral tradition, but in just those 11 countries.
Okay. Someone has asked, has anyone attempted a short critical edition of the Quran, which includes all of the variants and all of the variations?
Yes, there is, and I just showed it to you. So one of the page which I showed it to you tells us that this is the reading which is generally accepted, and on the margins we have the variations which are compiled, And this is something which has been done by many people.
Thank you. And as our last, what's the title of that book?
The title of that book, actually, we have a number of titles. I have all of them here in my library. So there are, for example, we have a Mujmal Qiraat al-Quran, which means a compendium of the readings of the Quran. It's a 14-volume work. And then I have another one which says Mujmal Qiraat, which is an encyclopedia of all the readings. And then I have another one which says the 14 readings of the Quran, which has those 14 readings compiled one after the other in the same fashion. So, I mean, it's not difficult. If you just Google them, just Google Mujmal Qiraat or Encyclopedia of Qiraat, you'll find a host of them in the first 10 entries.
Thank you. And the last question, is it possible that the different variations may have arisen as explanations for the Quran?
Yes. So some of the Qiraat or some of the versions, it does seem, have arisen because a Sahabi or a Tabi'i was actually explaining a particular Quranic word, and for that he used a synonym or an explanation. And ultimately, people thought that that explanation itself is a verse of the Quran. So yes, that it does seem to have happened. And I have actually noted down a lot of these words which were actually explained, and later on, unfortunately, the explanation itself became the verse.
Thank you. So inshallah, I think that's all we've got time for. But if you stay with us. Now, the campus mission statement, I'm sure this won't be anything new to the people who have benefited so greatly from campus spaces. So again, it's a space for young British Muslims to explore their faith together. We usually have residentials alongside masterclasses when we can go back to in-person things, inshallah, in the UK, to nurture a generation of positive purpose, balance, and moral integrity, to cultivate a strong, confident British Muslim identity, and actively participate and contribute to mainstream society by standing firmly for the values of justice and social concern. Inshallah, if you want to get involved with some of our projects, please visit our website or email info@isb.org.uk. Again, WhatsApp groups for campus e-circles are in the chat. And if you have any feedback from these masterclasses or have topics that you would like us to cover, please email them to campus@isb.org.uk. Thank you very much for attending this masterclass talk, and inshallah, so inshallah, we'll do one last question and then we'll finish the talk here. So someone has asked, how can two variations come from one man? So Naf.
Yeah, so I got the question. So Nafi, basically, he must be talking about Nafi. He has two students. One of them is Qalun and the other one is Warsh. So what happens is that they say that they received these two variations from two different teachers. So the reason that their students differ is because two of their teachers differed. So what happens is they transferred one version of one teacher to one student and another version of another teacher to another student. So it's like they received it in multiple versions from their students, from their teachers, and these multiple versions, so if we talk about two of them, so one of them was transferred to one of the students and another one to another of the students.
Thank you very much. Thank you so much for joining us for this masterclass, and inshallah, we hope that you will all join us again very soon. Assalamu alaikum.
Thank you very much. It's always been a pleasure.